All right, now it looks like everybody's here. All right, we've been given the all clear to start. So once presiding Judge Hill gets things going, I'll put the all lost time in the chat. Remember that this is live streaming, so just keep that in mind. We have 2 hours and 15 minutes, barring technical difficulties that would extend the time. But Judge Hill, you are ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Having just received the message to get started, we'll call the case of Stevie Rogers versus Drew Mars. My name is Judge David Hill. Scoring judges, if you look to the bottom left two buttons and the lower left of your screen and just keep your audio and video off unless the bailiff tells you otherwise. You should also have the video set to hide all non-video participants. So the only people that should be on the screen right now are the two counsel for the defense and the plaintiff for the openings, or at least the preliminary matters. Can the attorneys, starting with the plaintiff, please make appearances for the record?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Pranav Gandham. I'm joined today by my co-counsel, Miss Katie Burdett.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gandham and Miss Burdett. How are you today?
Doing great.
Very good, Your Honor. And Your Honor, we actually represent the plaintiff in today's case, Miss Stevie Rogers.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Miss Rogers. All right. Well, let's have the defense make appearances, and then we'll turn to any preliminary matters.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Dan Peel. I'm here today with Mr. Leo Mondani.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And we represent the defendant, Drew Mars, in today's case.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, counsel. Good afternoon, Miss Mars. All right. Plaintiff, are there any, Mr. Gandham, are there any matters for the court before we get started?
Just a few, Your Honor. First, we'd like to invoke Rules 603 and 615, which respectively call for the pre-swearing of any witnesses and the sequestration of all witnesses, barring party representatives. For the purposes of this trial, our party rep is Miss Stevie Rogers.
Counsel for the defense, I can't imagine any objection to that, given logistics and just common sensibility.
Fine with us, Your Honor.
All right. So that's 603 and 615. Anything else, Mr. Gandham?
Yes, Your Honor. When we're entering evidence, considering the odd nature of this trial, is it all right if we assume that the witnesses have the evidence in front of them so that we don't have to put it on the screen and potentially show it to the jury to authenticate it?
So that's a great question. So I think what we'll do is unless counsel informs me that or the record that something is being shown to the jury, we'll just assume that it can be shown to the person. And I would just have you narrate which steps we're at. I think you all can manage that. And if there are any questions, you can raise them with the court. But I think given the nature of where we're at and given the complications, I think that's probably the best way to go about it.
Of course, Your Honor. And the final matter we have, this is already in the pretrial rulings, but exhibits 1 through 7 are already admitted into evidence. And we just want Your Honor to know that.
That's helpful. Thank you, counsel.
And with that, Your Honor, we're ready to go with opening statements.
All right. Mr. Peel, or anything from the defense before we get started?
Nothing more from us, Your Honor. We're ready to go too.
Outstanding. Let's start then. All right. Mr. Gandham, if you're giving the opening statement, please proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. To stay in the will, she had to kill. It's August 15th, 2018. The defendant, Drew Mars, walks into Agatha Lee's room. She's the caretaker for Agatha Lee for the past 10 years, and she's checking on her just like she would any other morning. But today you're going to learn this morning was different. Because Agatha, she wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing. She didn't have a pulse, but the defendant, you learn she wasn't worried. She certainly wasn't surprised. Because she was the reason that Agatha was dead. You see, for the past 10 years, the defendant thought she was the sole beneficiary in Agatha's will. Agatha had made a fortune as a best-selling author, and when she died, everything she owned was going to go to the defendant. The defendant, all she had to do was wait, and she'd be set for life. But then the defendant learned what you're going to learn today. that on August 14th, Agatha changed her mind. That money was going to go to her granddaughter, leaving not a penny for the defendant. But the defendant realized she had to act quickly. She realized if she didn't want to lose the millions that she stood to inherit, she had to do something before Agatha changed that will. She realized that to stay in the will, she had to kill. Now, today, the evidence will show exactly that. Because on the night of August 14th, before Agatha had a chance to change that will, before she had a chance to take away everything the defendant had hoped for, she snuck into Agatha's room, replaced her medicine with a deadly poison, and the next morning, Agatha was dead. Everything she owned went right to the defendant. To stay in the will, she had to kill. So she did. But unfortunately for the defendant, here in Midlands, we have a law called the Slayer Statute. You might not have heard of it, but what that law says that is if some person kills someone else, they are ineligible to receive any part of their estate. In other words, if you kill someone, you cannot profit off of their death. And that's why Stevie Rogers, Agatha's granddaughter and only living relative, is suing the defendant under the Slayer Statute. Now, we as the plaintiff, we bear the burden of proof in today's trial. We have to show you one thing, that the defendant knowingly or purposefully caused the death of Agatha Lee. And we need to show you that by a preponderance of the evidence. In other words, that it's more likely than not. And we're going to do exactly that. We're going to do that by showing you to stay in the will, the defendant had to kill. You're going to hear a lot about that will today. And to tell you more about it, you'll meet Stevie Rogers, the plaintiff. And Miss Rogers is going to tell you how she reconnected with her grandmother in the summer of 2018. How on August 14th, her grandmother took her aside and said, Stevie, you're going to be back in the will. You're going to get the money when I die, not the defendant. Miss Rogers will tell you that when she exited that room, the defendant was right there, her ear pressed up against the door, listening to everything they were saying. And Miss Rogers will tell you that after the defendant heard that conversation, that very night, she saw the defendant go into her grandmother's room holding something. And just hours later, her grandmother was dead. To stay in the will, the defendant had to kill. You're also going to see some forensic evidence in today's trial. And to show you it, you're going to meet Detective Bond. Mr. Bond is going to show you the evidence he collected throughout his investigation. And he's going to show you one in particular, a bag of pills, the pills that were used to kill Agatha Lee. Mr. Bond is going to show you that this bag of pills used to kill the victim were found in the defendant's closet with the defendant's fingerprints. Members of the jury, no matter how this lawsuit goes, we can't bring Agatha Lee back. But what we can do, what you can do, members of the jury, is not let the defendant profit off of an innocent woman's death. You're going to see the defendant made a choice between her boss or millions of dollars. You're going to see that to stay in the will, she had to kill. And that's why at the end of this trial, my co-counsel, Katie Burdett, she'll summarize the evidence for you and ask you to find in favor of the plaintiff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gondam. Mr. Mandani, whenever you're ready.
Sir. Your Honor, Mr. Gondam, and may it please the court. Stevie Rogers was pulling the strings. Mr. Gondam just told you that Drew Mars is to blame for Agatha Lee's death. That she intentionally planted pills to kill Ms. Lee. He told you that in order to stay in the will, she had to kill. But what Mr. Gondon failed to mention is that there was another person with $20 million on the line. That person could have also switched those pills. That person is his own client, Agatha Lee's granddaughter, Stevie Rogers. So throughout today's trial, I want you to listen to the facts that the plaintiff won't tell you. Because when you do, you'll learn that Agatha Lee had disinherited Stevie Rogers in favor of Drew Mars. That Stevie Rogers asked to be put back into Ms. Lee's will. And how when she said no, Stevie Rogers decided to kill her grandmother, frame Drew Mars for it, and then sue in court for that inheritance instead. You'll learn that it was Stevie Rogers pulling the strings. But how would Stevie Rogers benefit from framing Drew Mars? Well, for the same reason that she has brought this suit. You see, in Midlands, if you kill someone, you can't inherit any of their money. Instead, that inheritance goes to the next of kin. In other words, if Drew Mars gets blamed for Agatha Lee's murder, then it's Stevie Rogers who walks away with $20 million. And today you'll learn that the plaintiff knew about this before her grandmother's death. In fact, we'll show you that that's something she's wanted for a very long time. You see, for the past 7 years, the plaintiff didn't even try to have a basic relationship with her grandmother. So Ms. Lee found family in her caretaker, Drew Mars. And you'll hear from Ms. Mars. She'll take that stand and tell you how in February of 2018, Agatha Lee decided to change her will. Instead of all of her money going to Stevie Rogers, she was going to make Drew Mars the sole heir of her fortune. She'll tell you how after that, Stevie Rogers decided to move back into Ms. Lee's house. Asked to be put back into her will, but Ms. Lee said no. And we're not just going to ask you to take Ms. Mars's word for it, because we're also going to call a good friend of Ms. Lee's to the stand, who had a conversation with her the day she died. A conversation after Ms. Lee refused to put Stevie Rogers back into her will. And he'll tell you how Agatha Lee was worried. How she said, "I hope I'm making the right decision. I hope Stevie will forgive me." So members of the jury, because Agatha Lee refused to put Stevie back into her will, the plaintiff decided to take matters into her own hands. You'll learn that that night, the plaintiff took a bottle of a deadly drug, switched it out with her grandmother's medication, and then planted that pill, the deadly drug, in Ms. Mars's bedroom, and making it look like as though it was Ms. Mars who was the guilty one. Because Stevie Rogers pulled the strings. So how do we know that Stevie Rogers was pulling the strings? Well, you see, Stevie Rogers made a critical error while she was trying to pin this on Drew Mars. You see, Mr. Gondon told you about the forensic evidence, about how that definitively ties this crime to Drew Mars. But members of the jury, you'll hear today that at first, the police thought this was a case about an elderly woman dying in her sleep. But that was until Stevie Rogers stepped in to tell the police that's not what happened. You'll learn that the plaintiff asserted this was a murder before any evidence had been collected. She insisted for the police to run a toxicology screening to show the drugs she knew would be in Ms. Lee's system. She asked the police over and over and over again to search Ms. Mars's bedroom for a bag she knew would be there. So as you listen to today's trial, you'll see that when Stevie Rogers did that, she showed her true hand. She showed you just how much she knew. She showed you that she was pulling the strings. And that's going to be a problem for the plaintiff. Because they and they alone have the burden to prove to you, by a preponderance of the evidence, just meaning it's more likely than not, that it was Drew Mars and not Stevie Rogers who poisoned Ms. Lee. And we anticipate that they won't be able to meet that burden because it was Stevie Rogers who was pulling the strings. And that's why at the end of today's trial, my colleague, Mr. Peel, will ask you to find in favor of Drew Mars. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. All right. Having heard opening statements, we'll invite the plaintiff to call their first witness. I would ask everyone to switch to gallery view so that you can see the attorneys and the witness at the same time.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Miss Stevie Rogers to the stand. Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Rogers, but most people just call me Stevie.
Why are you here?
I'm here because I believe Drew Mars deliberately poisoned and murdered my grandmother, Agatha Lee, and I just can't let her profit off of my grandmother's death.
Who is Drew Mars?
She was my grandmother's live-in caretaker.
We'll talk more about the defendant later, but first I want to introduce the jury to your grandmother and your relationship with her. Can we have Exhibit 1 on the screen? It's already in evidence. Could you describe that relationship to us?
Sure. My grandmother and I, when I was younger, we were really close. She always used to say that she saw a little bit of herself in me. So she was always asking what I thought about things. She would show me her favorite books. We'd play backgammon, bake together. I mean, we were inseparable. But when I got older, we lost touch.
Why did you lose touch?
There's no really easy way to say this. While I was in college, I lost both of my parents to a drunk driver, and I kind of lost it. I mean, I withdrew from everyone. I shut down. I didn't visit Nana like I used to. I mean, if I knew I was going to lose her this fast, I would have spent more time with her. But at that point, I was just developing some very unhealthy habits as I was trying to cope with my parents' loss.
How much contact did you have with your grandmother during this time period?
I mean, we called every so often, but I really never saw her after my parents died. But during that time, I did pick up writing, and I felt really connected to her and my mom because they were both writers. So I didn't feel like I lost the relationship.
When was the last time your grandmother reached out to you?
It was in February of 2018. I received a letter from Nana that she was disinheriting me from her estate and her will.
How did you react when you received this letter?
I was hurt. I didn't know she felt that way. I thought everything was fine, but clearly she saw that something was wrong, and I closed her out, and I wanted to make it better. I wanted to make it right.
How did you try and make it better?
Well, I knew I had to go visit her, so I tried to call her about it. I couldn't visit her initially because I was out of the country working on a novel, but as soon as I came back, I drove down to her house in Alabama, the one that I grew up in, but she wasn't there. She had moved. She hadn't told me where she was going, and none of her letters had return addresses, so I ended up finding a private investigator to try to locate her.
Were you able to find your grandmother?
Eventually I was. I found her in July when I got a new address.
What did you do after you found your grandmother's address?
Well, I wanted to make it right. So I packed my bags and I headed to her door. As when I got there, I was really nervous. I mean, I hadn't seen her in so long, but as soon as she saw me on her doorstep, she opened her arms and pulled me into this giant hug, and you could see this huge smile on her face. And she invited me to stay as long as I needed.
When did you arrive at your grandmother's house?
It was July 4th of 2018.
Was anyone else besides your grandmother at her house when you arrived?
Yeah, just her caretaker, Drew Mars.
How would you describe your relationship with the defendant prior to your grandmother's death?
I guess you could say it wasn't great. I mean, as soon as I showed up, Drew kept asking me when I was leaving, and she continued to ask me almost every single day that I was there. It really seemed like she didn't want me around. She would like hover around Nana, and anytime I tried to get more than a couple words in, she would interrupt and start her own conversation.
How was your relationship with your grandmother while you were staying in her home?
It was amazing. I mean, it was better than I could have even hoped. I mean, it was just a few weeks with her, but it really improved a lot. By the end of it, we were doing stuff like nothing had changed, playing games, reading books, talking about things together. It was like our relationship was fixed.
Did you ever discuss her estate?
Yeah. She brought it up one morning. We were sitting in the study having tea, and she told me that she was happy that we had gotten back to where we had been and that our relationship had improved. And she said that she had decided to reinstate me as the sole heir for her estate.
When did she tell you she was going to make you sole heir to her entire estate?
It was August 14th of 2018. She told me that morning that she would talk to her lawyer soon, but she didn't do it at that point.
Do you know if the defendant was aware that your grandmother was planning on changing the will?
I can't say for sure. All I know is that when I left that room, I saw Drew Mars by the door, and she was standing really close to it. And it seemed like she was listening. Her face was all red. She looked angry. And then she turned, she looked at me, and she mouthed the words, "No way."
After the defendant mouthed, "No way," what did you do for the rest of the day?
I mean, after that, it was basically a normal day. I didn't really do anything out of the usual. I watched a movie with Nana. We had dinner around 6 o'clock, and then I went to bed. I saw Nana go to bed at 9:30.
How did she seem when you saw her at 9:30?
When I saw her at 9:30, she looked fine. She looked healthy. She was moving around great.
Did you see anyone else enter your grandmother's bedroom after you left?
I did. After I said goodnight to Nana, I went downstairs to the sitting room. And from there, I could really see Nana's bedroom door. And as I was down there, around 9:35, 9:40, I saw Drew walked into her room, and she was holding something. She had her hand clenched around something, like it had something in it.
After you saw the defendant enter your grandmother's room with something that looked like something clenched in her hand, did you ever see your grandmother alive again?
No. After I said goodnight to her, that was it.
When did you wake up the next morning?
It was at 8:35 that next morning. I woke up to Drew pounding on the door, yelling that she found my Nana. She found her not breathing. And so I jumped up, of course, and I ran to her room, and I tried to help. I tried to help her, but I couldn't. She was gone at that point. And so I called 911.
Ms. Rogers, I'm sorry I have to ask you this, but did you have anything to do with your grandmother's death?
No, of course not. I had just gotten in a good place with my grandmother, and I was so happy to be there. That was the most fulfilled I'd felt in a long time. I would never.
Could we please have Exhibit 2 on the screen? It's already been entered into evidence. Mr. Rogers, do you know what this is?
Yes, This is my grandmother's toxicology report.
I want to zoom into that conclusion.
Okay.
According to the conclusion on this autopsy report, how did your grandmother die?
The report said that my grandmother died of chloroandramine poisoning.
Do you know if your grandmother took any medications regularly?
I know she took some medications regularly. I'm not sure what those were, but I know she took them right about before bedtime. So like 10:30 every night.
Besides your grandmother, are you aware of anyone else that had access to her medication?
I know Drew does. As Nana's caretaker, she filled up her pill organizer every Saturday and she would leave it on Nana's nightstand. I'm not sure what she put in there, but I did see Drew filling up the organizer a couple of times.
Earlier, you said you had a conversation with your grandmother about reinstating you as sole heir to her estate. Do you know if she had changed her will before she passed away?
No, we had only talked about it that morning.
To your knowledge, based on her will at the time of her death, who is set to inherit all of your grandmother's estate?
Her caretaker, Drew Mars.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Burdett. Pass for cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Rogers.
Good afternoon.
I want to start by talking about your relationship with your grandmother.
Of course.
You claimed that the two of you were pretty close, right?
Yeah, we were.
You even said on direct examination that your relationship was amazing.
When I came back, yeah, the change that we made was amazing.
Well, I want to talk about whether that's what your relationship was actually like.
Okay.
Growing up, you spent a lot of time with your grandmother, true?
Yeah,
But then in 2011, you stopped seeing her as often, right?
yeah. Like I said, after my parents died, I kind of closed myself off from the world. And obviously that wasn't the right thing to do, but that's what happened. And I didn't see Nana like I used to.
Ma'am, you said you closed yourself off. Isn't it true that from the summer of 2011 to the summer of 2018, you did not see your grandmother in person a single time?
No, she would call me and we would talk, but I didn't go to visit her. I was kind of caught up in my work.
So that's a no.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And you're aware now that she had moved during that time, right?
Now I'm aware. I didn't know then.
You didn't know then because she didn't tell you that she had moved to an entire new state.
No, obviously she thought our relationship was broken, and I'll never forgive myself for that.
You didn't have her new address.
No, she didn't send any letters with a return address.
You didn't have the phone number to this new house.
No, sir, I didn't.
Ma'am, you had to hire a private investigator to locate your own grandmother, true?
Yeah, but it was worth it. I needed to make things better between us. I mean, she was my grandmother. She was someone I looked up to. I didn't realize how bad our relationship was.
Hire a private investigator, ma'am?
Yes, I did.
Then I'd like to talk to you about Ms. Lee's will. Now, you know that in 2008, Agatha Lee named you the sole heir to her fortune, correct?
Yeah, that was right after my parents passed away.
But in 2018, she changed that will, right?
Yes, and she sent me a letter about that.
And you recognize both of those wills if I showed it to you?
I'm sure I would. I think I've seen both of them.
Your Honor, we're going to display Exhibits 8 and 9, those wills, just for the purpose of laying foundation to enter them into evidence. Mr. Peel, could we have those up? Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties.
Okay, good. I was hoping so.
My apologies, Your Honor.
It happens. I had it happen in a deposition a few weeks ago.
I'm sorry about that. There we go. Now, Ms. Rogers, the will on the left, that's the one from 2008, correct?
It appears to be, sir, yes.
And the will on the right, that's the will from 2018?
Yeah, that's correct.
Both look to be fair and accurate copies of those wills?
From what I can tell, yes.
And from what you can tell, they haven't been changed or altered in any way?
No, sir.
At this time, Your Honor, we move Exhibits 8 and 9 into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, 8 and 9 are entered.
Now, Ms. Rogers, in the will on the left, you are the beneficiary, true?
That's correct, yes.
Back in 2008, you were slated to receive all of Ms. Lee's estate.
Yeah, I mean, I was her only living relative at that point.
The will on the right, the beneficiary is Drew Mars, true?
Yes, that's correct.
It specifically writes you out of the will, true?
Yeah, Nana obviously thought that there was no saving our relationship at that point.
And she, as you said, she wrote you a letter telling you that she changed this will, correct?
She did, yes.
Ms. Peel, could we have Exhibit 10 up? Again, Your Honor, it's just to lay foundation for the witness. Now, this is that letter you were talking about, correct?
Yeah, that's the letter,
It's a fair and accurate copy of that letter,
from what I can tell.
and it hasn't been changed or altered in any way.
No, sir, it doesn't seem to be.
Your Honor, we move Exhibit 10 into evidence.
Objection, Your Honor, as to hearsay.
May I respond?
Of course.
Your Honor, the only portion of this letter that we're actually interested in are two lines, two sentences from paragraph 4, the first and the last. Because we become family in name only, I've decided to change my will. And so just as soon as I sign this letter, I'm going to sign a new will, leaving everything to Drew. Now, both of these statements are statements of intent, and they are an exception to hearsay on the rule 8033.
All right, Ms. Burdett, I'll hear you on that.
Your Honor, we have no problem with just those two statements coming into evidence as long as the rest of the document is redacted as hearsay.
Super. I love when people I love when counsel reach agreement. All right, so we will admit Exhibit 10, redacting paragraphs 1, 2, 3, and 5 in full, and the middle sentence. I think there's only 3 sentences in the paragraph 4. So the sentence beginning with Drew and ending with I do will be redacted. The other 2 sentences will be the only ones that remain, but for the date, name, and signature. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Ms. Rogers, this letter says, because we become family in name only, I've decided to change my will. True?
It does say that.
It says your grandmother was signing a new will, leaving everything to Drew Mars.
Yes, sir, it does say that.
And ma'am, that wasn't the worst of your problems, was it?
That was the worst of my problems. It
Well,
was my only family member.
Well, ma'am, in summer of 2018, you ran out of money, didn't you?
I ran out of the money my parents left me. Yes, sir. But I still had money.
That's right, ma'am. You had been living on your trust fund money, correct?
Yeah, for a while, I wasn't really leaving the house, so I couldn't get a job. And once I started writing my novel, I wasn't really earning money at that point. So I worked off of that.
And that trust fund initially had $2 million in it?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And at this point, as you said, you didn't have a paying job.
Not at that point. I was hoping to earn money off my novel, but obviously that was not published yet.
But in June of 2018, that trust fund ran out of money, didn't it?
It did. And like I said, I still had some money left, but not that trust fund.
So it's yes, ma'am. At the end, June of 2018, that trust fund that you'd been living off of was running out of money.
The money from my parents was running out. Yes, sir.
And then just a few weeks after your trust fund was running out of money, you showed up at your grandmother's house for the first time in over 7 years. Yes or no?
It was only July when I figured out where she lived. It took me my last 10,000 to try to find her, but yes, sir.
That's yes, a few weeks after you ran out of money?
From my parents. Yes. Yes, sir.
So let's talk about what happened once you got to Ms. Lee's house. And now on direct examination, you told us you had a conversation with your grandmother about her will.
Yes, on August 14th of 2018.
You're telling us today that she was going to leave everything to you?
Yeah, Nana was really excited. She kept moving around. She told me she was so happy that I was back, and she told me she would leave me her estate.
But ma'am, you weren't taking notes during this conversation?
No, it just kind of happened spontaneously. I mean, we were eating breakfast, drinking tea. I didn't know what she was going to talk about.
So no notes, and there's no recording of this conversation either, no?
No, I didn't know the conversation was going to happen.
So Ms. Rogers, isn't it true you don't even have another person who can corroborate what you're telling us in court today?
No, it was just breakfast with me and my Nana.
So let's talk about how your grandmother died. You know that Agatha Lee died because of chloroandramine poisoning, correct?
That's what the toxicology report said. Yes, sir.
And ma'am, you actually knew that your grandmother had an allergy to chloroandramine.
Yeah, Drew had mentioned it kind of randomly one day, so she had told me about it, and I knew that Nana was deathly allergic.
And you found your grandmother dead on August 15th, correct?
Yeah, I found her then.
And ma'am, when you saw your grandmother's body, the very first thing you did was call 911, true?
Of course, my grandmother was dead on the ground. What else was I gonna do?
Well, ma'am, you told the police, I think this was a murder, didn't you?
I did, because she was so healthy the day before. She looked so normal, and then she was dead in front of me.
You told the police that it was a murder?
Yes,
And when the police got to your house, there were a couple of very specific things you asked them to do, didn't you?
yes, I wanted them to investigate as much as they could.
Well, ma'am, you say you wanted them to investigate as much as you could, but first you insisted that the police search Drew Mars's bedroom. True?
Yes, she was the only other person in the house with us.
You insisted, ma'am?
Yes, sir, I insisted on investigating everything they could.
You insisted that the police run a toxicology screening on Ms. Lee's body, right?
Yes, I wanted them to look at any possible way that she could have been killed.
Well, you're saying you want them to look at any possible way, but isn't it true that you insisted they run a toxicology screen because you already knew what it would show?
Yes, I knew that my grandmother had been murdered.
So let's talk about how you knew what it would show. You're suing Drew Mars for inheritance, right?
At this point, yes.
In fact, you filed this lawsuit before the results from that toxicology screening even came back.
Yeah, I knew something was wrong, and I couldn't let Drew profit off of Nana's murder.
You claimed Drew Mars poisoned your grandmother before the police determined that your grandmother had been poisoned.
Yeah, it all seems so suspicious, and Drew was the only one in the house with us.
Now, ma'am, you know that when she died, your grandmother's will left everything to Drew Mars, correct?
Yes, it did.
But you also know if the person who's supposed to get that inheritance gets blamed for someone's death, they can't take any of that money. Isn't that right?
Well, of course not. If you kill the person, you should not get their money.
Right, it goes to the next of kin, true?
Yes, sir, that's correct to my knowledge.
In fact, you knew that before your grandmother died. Isn't that right?
Yes, I think it's common knowledge.
Well, you're the next of kin of Agatha Lee.
Yeah, I was her only surviving relative.
And you know if Drew Mars gets blamed for your grandmother's death, you walk away with over $20 million. Yes or no?
Yes, if Drew Mars murdered my grandmother, then I get left her estate.
$20 million, ma'am?
To my knowledge, yes.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Ms. Burdett, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Ms. Rogers, opposing counsel asked you about your knowledge of a drug called chloroandramine.
Yes.
Do you know if your grandmother was taking any medications that looked like chloroandramine?
I can't say. I don't know what Nana took. I mean, Mars filled up her pill organizer. She was in charge of all the medications.
Opposing counsel also asked you some questions about why you asked the police to investigate your grandmother's death. Could you tell us why you wanted the police to investigate?
I mean, the day before, the weeks before, Nana was fine. She was healthy. It just seems so suspicious.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
No recross, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Mandani. All right, Ms. Rogers, you may step down with the court's thanks. We'll give the scoring judges a moment to put in their numbers, and then we'll have the plaintiff call their next witness. All right, Mr. Peel, if you'd like to, or excuse me, Mr. Gondam, if you'd like to proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Investigator M. Bond. And can we proceed?
Please.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Good afternoon. I'm M. Bond.
We're going to need your full first name for the record. Is M your full first name?
Yes, sir. One letter. Efficient, to the point, distinctive, three purposes. It's ideal for my line of work.
All right, Mr. Bond, what exactly do you do for a living?
I'm a private investigator, with the operative word there being private.
What do you mean operative word private?
If you've ever looked at the front page of a tabloid, you've seen all manner of gossip. An actor with a nasty divorce, a family member disappearing, a fight gone wrong. Now, no one is giving that reporting a Pulitzer. I find it pretty abhorrent myself, but it sells. Now, clients who want their cases solved without that publicity, they become my clients.
Okay, so how'd you become involved with this case?
On the morning of July 15th, 2018, I got a call from a Miss Stevie Rogers. She said that her grandmother, Agatha Lee, had died that morning and she needed me to investigate the death.
Did Miss Rogers pay you for that investigation?
Yes, sir. I was paid my standard fee of $25,000.
Does that payment depend on you reaching some sort of conclusion or you testifying a certain way right now?
Absolutely not. I mean, that would be both wildly unethical and non-standard to boot. We agreed on that number from the start, and it was a flat rate.
So after you got that call from Miss Rogers, what'd you do?
At that point, I had my driver bring me to Lee Manor, where Miss Lee and Miss Rogers had lived together, and thus our investigation began. First, we looked for the means, how Agatha Lee had died, and if appropriate, we knew we could continue to motive.
All right, means and motive. Let's take those one by one, starting with means. How did you determine how Agatha Lee died?
We had to start, of course, by inspecting the body, sir.
Did you notice anything when you inspected her body?
At first glance, Agatha looked almost peaceful, and no bruises or scratches I could see. But of course, looks can be deceiving. After all, there are murder weapons that are undetectable at the first glance. Say a drop of poison in the drink, a little prick from a syringe, an innocent-looking pill before bedtime. I don't mean to be macabre, but Miss Rogers and I both had to request both an autopsy and a toxicology screen from the police.
So when you and Miss Rogers requested an autopsy and a toxicology screen, did the police agree to do those?
At first, they didn't. Detective Khan, who was the lead investigator, was well-intentioned, but I confess a little naive. Miss Khan said Agatha Lee is old, so the death was probably natural causes. Then the caretaker, Drew Mars, she spoke up and she went further.
What do you mean the defendant went further?
Miss Mars insisted that Agatha Lee's body be cremated, and she said that Agatha would have wanted that.
To be clear, Mr. Bond, if Agatha Lee's body was cremated, would you have been able to perform an autopsy on that?
No.
What about a toxicology screen?
I certainly can't perform that on ashes either, sir. Unfortunately, cooler heads prevailed, and the police agreed to conduct both tests in due time.
So would you recognize that autopsy if I showed it to you?
No doubt.
If we can get Exhibit 2 up on the screen, it's already been in evidence. Mr. Bond, what are we looking at here?
This is the document that proved me right. The police autopsy report that shows that Agatha Lee's death wasn't as simple as an old lady dying in her sleep. Actually, if you wouldn't mind zooming in to the fourth paragraph.
Of course. What does the autopsy list as the cause of death?
A fatal allergic reaction to a drug called chloroandramine.
Do you know if anyone was aware that Miss Lee had this fatal allergy?
Yes, I found out that Drew Mars was aware of that allergy, and Miss Mars said she knew it was a potentially deadly allergy.
Do you know if Miss Lee took any medicines on a regular basis?
She did, and of course, I inspected all of them. And one of them, her arthritis medication, is basically identical to chloroandramine. Same size, same color, same shape, both odorless, both tasteless. The difference, of course, is that one helped her arthritis and the other would kill her.
So do you know who is in charge of giving Agatha Lee her medicine every day?
Yes, Drew Mars. This in total was strong evidence linking Drew Mars to the means of death.
All right, Mr. Bond, you said that chloroandramine killed Agatha Lee.
Objection, Your Honor, to an improper opinion.
Which opinion, sir?
Specifically saying that this constitutes a means for Drew Mars. We believe that's a legal conclusion that Mr. Bond hasn't laid foundation that he can give.
Gandham?
Your Honor, that's not a legal conclusion. Mr. Bond is just trying to show us who in this investigation had the ability to kill Agatha Lee. He found evidence that supported that conclusion. It doesn't require any legal knowledge or a law degree to make that sort of conclusion. It's rationally based on his perception as a lay witness under Rule 701.
May I respond?
Mr. Peel, I first have a question. Is means or motive, I guess, an element of this claim or of this cause of action in this jurisdiction, or what? How does this go to the ultimate issue, I think?
Your Honor, means and motive aren't, in so many words, elements of the claim here today, but we believe both of these are legal conclusions. Now, Mr. Bond can talk about the facts that he found and the facts that that the police investigated and the facts he's familiar with. But for him to put those facts together and make a conclusion about whether Drew Mars has the means or had the motive to commit this crime, that's for the trier of fact to decide. The jury's going to use that to decide whether or not Drew Mars was responsible for Agatha Lee's death.
Would Your Honor like me to respond?
Yes, please.
Your Honor, in essence, what Mr. Peel just said is that it's up to the jury to decide because they're going to see evidence and make that conclusion themselves. Mr. Bond is the one showing them that evidence. He's allowed to make this conclusion because it's rationally based on the evidence he found. Additionally, like Mr. Peel said, means and motive, while they're convenient for proving our case, aren't the actual issue at hand in this trial, and therefore it's not infringing on the jury's province. It doesn't require any sort of legal knowledge or conclusion from Mr. Bond.
So, Mr. Gandham, I have a question, and then I'll make my decision. Is this witness, is to the extent that you can proffer, going to make the ultimate conclusion that that the defendant actually committed the crime, or not committed the crime, but did the action that led to the cause of action here?
Your Honor, Mr. Bond will not say that.
All right. Well, I think if we stray into that territory, Mr. Peel, you can re-raise your objection, but for now, I'm going to overrule the objection, and you may proceed, Mr. Gandham.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Bond, you said that chloroandramine was the substance that killed Agatha Lee. Did you ever search her house for that chloroandramine?
When I first entered the house, I conducted a full search with one exception. Drew Mars would not let me enter either her bedroom or her closet. Unfortunately, the police do not serve solely at Drew Mars's pleasure, and so when they obtained a warrant to search the whole house a week later, they were both gracious enough and wise enough to bring me along in a search of Drew Mars's area.
Did you find anything in the defendant's bedroom?
We did. We found a black bag with a bottle of pills inside of it.
Do you have pictures of that bag and those pills in front of you, Mr. Bond? They should be listed exhibits 15 and 17.
I do.
Are they accurate depictions of the objects in those pictures?
They are.
At this time, Your Honor, plaintiff moves to enter exhibits 15 and 17 into evidence.
No objection to either.
All right, 15 and 17 are in.
All right, Mr. Bond, let's start with the bag. Do you know if there was any forensic evidence on that?
Yes, in their report, the police found one usable fingerprint on the zipper of the bag.
And do you know if the police were able to determine whose fingerprint that belonged to?
Yes, that fingerprint was a 16-point match to Drew Mars.
All right, let's move on to those pills found in the defendant's closet in a bag with the defendant's fingerprint. Were the police able to identify what those pills were?
They weren't. They ran a toxicology scan and we found that the pills were chloroandramine. That, of course, is the same substance used to kill Agatha Lee.
All right, Mr. Bond, besides the bag containing chloroandramine, did you find the defendant's fingerprints anywhere else, or rather did the police?
Yes, the defendant's fingerprints were also on 2 arthritis pills inside of Agatha Lee's bathroom, put in a bottle.
Now, you said earlier that the arthritis medication is virtually identical to chloroandramine. How many pills of chloroandramine were used to kill Agatha Lee?
Very good. You're catching on. Exactly the question I asked. And sure enough, 2 pills, a perfect match.
All right, Mr. Bond, I want to shift gears a little bit to talk about Agatha Lee's finances. Do you know how much her estate was worth?
$25 million in total, certainly a princely sum.
And did she have a will that said where those assets would go when she passed away?
She did, most recently updated as of February 2018.
And if we can get Exhibit 9 on the screen, I believe Mr. Mandani already entered into evidence. Mr. Bond, what does this document say?
It says that when Agatha Lee died, she would be leaving that entire $25 million estate to Drew Mars.
Now, Mr. Bond, do you know if this will was ever read to people in this case?
It was, and I made sure I was present.
Wait, why did you make sure you were present at the will reading?
The Shakespeare fans among us may recall Act 3, Scene 2 of Hamlet, wherein Hamlet stages a reenactment of his father's murder. His goal, of course, was to elicit a reaction, to see who in the audience might have been the killer. Now, I tend to find Shakespeare homages a little trite, but I made an exception here. I was looking to see if anyone had a strong reaction at the will reading.
You said you were looking for a reaction. Was there any at the will reading?
There was. When I read the section that said that Miss Mars would receive all of Agatha's assets, as she said repeatedly, almost theatrically, I had no idea.
The defendant saying she had no idea when she found out that she was receiving Agatha's assets. Do you know if that was true, Mr. Bond?
I soon found reason to believe that Miss Mars was not telling the truth.
Oh, how did you find that?
I did something unscrupulous. Perhaps it ran afoul of professional norms. Certainly my mother would not have been pleased, but I am unshakable in the pursuit of truth. So I accessed Drew Mars's email from her laptop and I found a message that contradicted her claims.
Mr. Bond, do you have that email Exhibit 13 in front of you?
Yes, sir.
Is it a fair and accurate copy of that email?
It is.
And who sent that?
It's sent by Drew Mars.
At this time, Your Honor, plaintiff moves to enter Exhibit 13 into evidence.
No objection.
13 is out.
And can we get that on the screen, please? In this email, what does the defendant say?
She says that Agatha Lee told her she was changing the will to leave everything to Drew Mars 6 months prior. Now, of course, that makes it rather hard to believe that Drew Mars, in fact, had no idea she wasn't the inheritor of the will.
Mr. Bond, you mentioned earlier today that at the start of the investigation.
Your Honor, actually, to argumentative to that last portion they just put there, could I explain?
Yes, Mr. Pugh.
So that the thing they just put on the screen says the quote that Drew Mars said, but then a descriptor that opposing counsel has put after that quote to describe what it means. But that's not an actual part of the quote. And so we don't believe there's foundation to say that is necessarily about that. That's a matter for closing arguments, for them to argue it's about that.
Response, Your Honor?
Briefly, Mr. Ghanem. So I have been interpreting this thing on my screen as if we were in a live courtroom, you'd have a blow up and you'd be able, or a PowerPoint or something, and be able to tack these things up and display them to the jury as we were going along. Is that what this roughly is for today's purposes?
Essentially, Your Honor, just in virtual form.
Okay, right. Okay. So I think I am curious about that last line, since that is, potentially, Mr. Peel, I'm kind of interpreting this as misleading or some of a guise of that type of argument. Mr.
Would
Peel,
Your Honor?
Is that right?
Yes, exactly, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Ghanem, I'll hear you on that very narrow point.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Bond already testified that Miss Mars, the defendant, said, I had no idea right after finding out that she was being named as Agatha Lee's sole beneficiary of the will. Therefore, it's rationally based on his perception to say that it's in response to that will reading. Additionally, that goes to Mr. Peel's objection goes to weight, not admissibility. He's free to cross-examine Mr. Bond on this statement and whether or not it's in direct response to that.
So I think this is just a matter of how this is structured. And Mr. Peel, I take your point is well founded, given kind of the limits of what we're at. So what we're going to do is we're going to constructively remove about through the will. We're going to leave I had no idea. Mr. Gondam, if you'd like to raise the argument during closing, that's certainly fine. But I think just the way you've structured it does kind of shade over the line, which I'm going to agree with Mr. Peel on. So I'm going to leave I had no idea. The context, you can raise it at any point you like, but I'm going to redact this thing for the purpose of showing to the jury to that extent. Is that all right?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. With that understood, you may proceed, sir.
Mr. Bond, you mentioned it earlier today that the police were going to rule Miss Lee's death as natural causes and that the defendant wanted the body cremated. If all that had happened, according to the will, who would have gotten Agatha Lee's estate?
Drew Mars.
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Gonda. Mr. Peel, you may proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bond.
Good afternoon, sir.
Now, sir, I want to start by asking you about the physical evidence you just mentioned on direct, okay?
Gladly.
You told us you found Drew Mars's fingerprints in 2 places, right?
Right, the police and I don't mean it to seem as though I did all of the work here, just the bulk of it.
So 2 places, sir?
Yes, sir.
And the first place you found fingerprints was the zipper of the bag that had the chloroandramine in it, right?
That's right, the pull zipper, or the zipper you'd use to open it.
But it's true, sir. You didn't find any prints on the bottle of chloroandramine inside of that bag, right?
No usable prints were found there, sir.
No prints on the pills themselves?
On the chloroandramine pills, no, sir. Not the ones in the bottle.
None anywhere inside of the bag either. Isn't that true?
No, sir. No fingerprints found there.
No, sir. You found 1 print from Drew Mars on the outside of that bag, right?
Right. And again, I'll caveat with 1 usable print. That's right.
So 1 print you were able to identify as belonging to Drew Mars, right?
Correct.
Now, Mr. Bond, I'm holding a bag here. Can you see this okay?
I can.
And now this isn't the same bag from that you recovered, right?
Right.
But you'd agree, this bag does have a zipper on it, right? A pull zipper, you called it?
Right. This bag has a pull zipper. I don't know what substance that is, to what extent it would leave fingerprints, but it does seem to have some sort of zipper. That's correct.
And you'd agree right now it's zipped shut, right? You can see that?
Yes, sir.
But so you'd agree that I can be touching this bag while it's zipped shut, right?
That bag? Yes, sir.
So let's say this bag was in my closet. If I were looking for something and my finger touched the zipper, you'd agree that could leave a fingerprint, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for an expert opinion under Rule 702. May I explain?
Certainly.
Your Honor, when Mr. Bond was talking about this fingerprint evidence, he admitted he didn't find the fingerprints, the police did. And Mr. Bond isn't qualified to tell us how fingerprints can be left on surfaces or whether or not they can be at all. He just doesn't have that expert knowledge, and the foundation isn't there for him to give that conclusion that Mr. Peel wants, that a finger rubbing against the zipper could leave a fingerprint. He doesn't have that knowledge, that training, and therefore this is inadmissible under Rule 702.
May I respond?
Mr. Peel.
So, Your Honor, during their direct examination, Mr. Bond talked extensively about the fingerprints that were found on the bag and on the arthritis pills. So a lot of fingerprint evidence is actually already on the record. And second of all, Your Honor, we're not asking for any specialized expert opinion. All I'm asking this witness is if I put my finger on a zipper, it might leave a fingerprint. I'm not asking to say whether it definitively would or wouldn't, just whether it could. So that's not an expert opinion.
Well, Mr. Peel, Mr. Ghanem, I'll hear from you in a moment. Mr. Peel, my understanding is that hypotheticals are almost always in the vein of experts. How is this not a hypothetical, and how is this not a finger, specifically in the guise of fingerprint evidence? How is this not an expert issue?
Your Honor, we believe that specifically asking the witness whether putting my finger on something might leave a fingerprint isn't an expert opinion. It's a lay opinion in effect.
Ghanem?
Your Honor, even though it's a hypothetical, he's asking Mr. Bond whether or not rubbing his finger on that zipper would leave a fingerprint. Again, Mr. Bond doesn't have the training to know if that's the case. Additionally, even if it's just a hypothetical, even if Mr. Bond is saying it might, Your Honor, that would mislead the jury. They would give this testimony undue weight when they shouldn't, because this witness is not an expert.
Mr. Gundam, I want to clarify one thing, and then I'll rule.
Yes, Your Honor.
Has all the testimony, and Mr. Peel, you may weigh in on this if depending, has all the testimony from Mr. Bond been to fingerprints that other people found and determined that were there, rather than how they got there or their nature?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Bond, all he said was that fingerprints were found in different places and that it was the police who conducted that in an already admitted police report. He never made any conclusion as to A, how they were found, B, that he found them.
Peel, is that correct?
With the testimony so far, Your Honor, that is correct.
All right, then I'm going to sustain the objection. I agree that the question sounds more in the neighborhood of an expert rather than a lay witness, so I'm going to strike the question. Mr. Bond, you don't have to answer it.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Mr. Bond, that fingerprint that the police found on the zipper, isn't it true you can't tell us how it got there, right?
Certainly not. That would be a question in the province of Detective Khan.
You can't tell us when it got there, right?
No.
Sir, you can't even tell us whether Miss Mars has ever even opened that bag at all, can you?
No, just that Miss Mars has touched the pull zipper enough to have left a fingerprint on it.
So, sir, that's a no? You can't tell us that?
Whether she opened the bag, no, just that she's touched the pull zipper.
Now, sir, the second place you found fingerprints was on some of Miss Lee's arthritis medication, right?
Right, specifically on 2 pills of them.
Well, I want to talk about those fingerprints. Now, you know that Drew Mars was Miss Lee's caretaker, right?
That's right.
And you know that one job Drew Mars had was to put Miss Lee's pills into her pill organizer each night.
That's right.
Mr. Bond, isn't it true you can't tell us how those fingerprints got on those arthritis medication, right?
Right. It's just noteworthy that of all the pills in that cabinet, the only 2 with Drew Mars's fingerprints on them were those 2 pills of the arthritis medication. But I can't tell you exactly when she touched them. That's right.
Well, sir, I'm not asking what you think is noteworthy, just what you can tell us, and you can't tell us that, right?
Well, I can tell you that it's noteworthy, but no, I can't tell you the exact time that those fingerprints were imprinted. That's exactly right.
Can't even give us an estimate, right?
No, sir, not me. Again, that would be Detective Khan's job.
Can't tell us how those fingerprints got on those arthritis pills, right?
No, sir, not based on the fingerprinting evidence.
Mr. Bond, you can't tell us whether those fingerprints got there while Miss Lee was just distributing the arthritis, or while Miss Mars was just distributing the arthritis medication, can you?
I can tell you that it's unlikely that that's the case, given that none of the other pills of any of the other medicines had fingerprints. But again, I cannot make that conclusion definitively based on the presence of fingerprints.
You're on a motion to strike as an improper opinion. Can I explain? Specifically the portion where he said it was unlikely.
You may explain.
So, Your Honor, this witness just said it was unlikely that was how those prints got on that pills, or got on those pills, because it was only on 2. That goes into the same issue we discussed before. That invades the province of an expert opinion that this witness doesn't have the foundation. It's the same objection you sustained earlier. So we would ask that portion of the answer be struck as an expert opinion that this witness can't give.
Mr. Gundam.
Your Honor, Mr. Peel opened the door to this on cross-examination by asking Mr. Bond if he couldn't tell when or how these fingerprints got on the pills. It's up to Mr. Peel to ask the questions to not get an expert opinion from Mr. Bond.
Mr. Peel, I take your point, but I think this is slightly different than the objection that I sustained a few moments ago. I think the question of whether it's unlikely that fingerprints got on something based on them not appearing on other things is slightly different than manner of how a fingerprint is accrued. I take it that it's close, but I think it's just on the other side of the line. So I'm going to overrule your objection and the answer will stand. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Bond, I want to talk about how you got involved in this case, okay?
Of course.
Now, you heard from Stevie Rogers on August 15th, 2018, right?
That's right, that morning.
And sir, the very first thing Miss Rogers told you was that her grandmother had been murdered, right?
That's correct.
So then you went over to Miss Lee's house, right?
Naturally, right after breakfast.
And when you got there, the police indicated they believed Miss Lee might have died from natural causes, didn't they?
Right, that was their initial conclusion from inspecting the body, and I confess it was my own. There were no scratches or bruises and no obvious signs of struggle.
So, sir, that was what they said at first?
At first, yes, sir.
In fact, sir, the detective actually suggested taking Miss Lee's body to the funeral home.
Right, and from the evidence we found, a good thing they didn't.
So that's yes, sir. It was the detective, not Drew Mars, who suggested that?
There's a distinction here. Drew Mars wanted the body cremated. Detective Khan wanted the body taken to the funeral home.
So I'm not asking about cremation, just the funeral home. And that was the detective, right?
Right, that was the detective.
Now, Mr. Bond, on direct, you said something. You said you and Miss Rogers both requested an autopsy and toxicology screen. Did I get that right?
Right, jointly we requested those tests.
Well, hold on, sir. Isn't it true that the first person to say that the police should do a toxicology screen was Stevie Rogers?
That's correct.
Stevie Rogers said you couldn't destroy the evidence of a crime. True?
So Stevie Rogers said I couldn't destroy the evidence of a crime?
Yes, sir. Stevie Rogers said that no one could destroy the evidence of a crime, and that's what cremating the body would do.
Oh, yes. And that was my intuition too, of course. Like I said, it's impossible to run such tests when the body is turned to ashes, unfortunately.
Sir, Stevie Rogers demanded that the body be investigated, didn't she?
That's right.
You're even aware that Miss Rogers made some pretty specific requests to the police, aren't you?
That's right. She was following them around as they went through their investigation. She was understandably angry and emotional.
So pretty specific requests, sir?
That's right. She would follow the police and she would tell them to photograph this or that, make sure everything was documented.
Well, I want to talk about those requests. Mr. Mondani, could we get what's been pre-admitted as Exhibit 6 on the screen? Now, sir, this is the police report for Agatha Lee's death, right?
That's right, sir. Yes.
Now, let's zoom in on paragraph 19 here. This says, after the body was removed, Rogers insisted that I needed to search Mars's bedroom, right?
That's right. She suspected Drew Mars.
So this paragraph doesn't say Miss Rogers wanted them to search the entire house, does it?
No, I was already conducting a search of the full house.
Well, sir, to be clear, that's a no to my question. This paragraph doesn't say that Miss Rogers wanted the police to search the entire house.
No, she was making a specific request.
She only requested Miss Mars's bedroom, true?
Right, she insisted on that.
And then let's zoom in on paragraph 21. Now, this paragraph reads, over the next several days, Rogers repeatedly contacted me to ask about the investigation and requesting to know if we would be performing a toxicology analysis of Lee's body, doesn't it?
That's right.
So this paragraph doesn't say that Miss Rogers asked for every single possible test, does it?
No, together we had requested both the autopsy and the toxicology screen. It seems that she was inquiring about the toxicology screen.
Hold on, sir. You're saying it was together, but it's true. Your name isn't in this paragraph.
No, sir. This is the police report. I had spoken to the police on the first day. And as I've mentioned, both in the speech I gave on August 20th, which I've actually documented, and earlier today, I was, of course, in close contact with Detective Khan throughout.
So, sir, that's a no. Your name is not in this paragraph.
Not in this paragraph? No, sir. It's a long report.
This says that only Miss Rogers requested a toxicology screen.
That's right. That she was following up on the toxicology screen.
So let's talk about how Miss Rogers might have known to ask all that. Now, Miss Rogers had told you before that her grandmother had written her out of the will less than a year before she died, right?
Right. I was aware of that.
You know that Miss Rogers had come to live with Miss Lee shortly before she died.
Correct.
You know that Miss Rogers admits to having been in the house the night Miss Lee died.
Right. It was Drew Mars, Stevie Rogers, and Agatha Lee all in the house that night.
So, sir, you can't tell us whether Miss Rogers might have had access to Drew Mars's room, can you?
To Drew Mars's room? No, I can't comment one way or another on that.
You don't know if Miss Rogers went into Drew Mars's room on August 14th.
No, I mean, again, I find it unlikely given that Drew Mars was very defensive and protective about her room when I asked to search it, but I can't rule it out or guarantee it one way or another.
So that's a no, sir. You can't tell us.
Not definitively, no, sir.
And isn't it true you know that Miss Rogers admits to having had access to Miss Lee's pill organizer.
That's right. It was inside the house.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. Nothing further.
Gondon?
No redirect, Your Honor. We just asked that Mr. Bond be excused.
Mr. Bond, you may be excused for the court's thanks.
Thank you, sir.
All right, counsel, is there anything further from the plaintiff at this time?
No, Your Honor. We rest our case in chief.
All right, so I've got 5:07 on my time, and that's Eastern Standard, rather. I know we're in a bunch of time zones today. I know.
I believe Your Honor's muted.
The all loss is what time? I'm sorry, I lost the chat.
6:15, I believe.
That's right.
Muted one more time, Your Honor.
Infernal machines. Okay. Do you think if we took a 5-minute break, that would be enough time to get everything done?
Yes, I believe so, Your Honor.
Fine with us, Your Honor.
All right. I just don't want to take any time away from you. All right. So we'll stand up now, and we'll be back at 5:13 EST.
Of course.
And I would remind everyone that the live stream is remaining during the break.
Are all the judges back? Could you guys just turn your videos on real quick or say that you're back?
I am back.
Hi, this is Taylor. I'm back.
Awesome. All right, David, it looks like everybody's here. So if you're ready, I'll let the students back in.
Yep, I'm good.
Looks like both the plaintiff and defense teams are back. Judge Hill, ready to go when you are.
All right, fantastic. All right, would the defense like to present their case?
Yes, Your Honor, we call Drew Mars to the stand.
Excellent.
May I proceed?
You may.
Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hi, I'm Drew Mars.
Ms. Mars, how old are you?
I'm 33.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a nurse. I actually recently went back to get my master's in nursing.
Ms. Mars, I'm gonna show you Exhibit 1. We've heard a lot today about your relationship with Agatha Lee. So I want to start by asking, how'd you know Ms. Lee?
Well, I was her personal nurse and personal assistant for about 10 years.
What was your relationship to Ms. Lee like?
We ate meals together, watched TV together, played board games. She was my boss, obviously, but she was really a friend.
Well, I want to talk to you about some of your responsibilities as Agatha Lee's nurse. Were you in charge of giving her her medication?
Yes, I was. Once a week, I would put a variety of medications into a pill organizer for her.
Ma'am, I asked you before trial if you could bring a bottle of pills and a pill organizer to court. Do you have those with you right now?
I do, yes.
And is that the same pill that you used to put Ms. Lee's medication in?
Oh no, this is just my own pill organizer and my own allergy medications.
Now, could you please demonstrate for the court how you would generally put pills into a pill organizer?
Of course. So I would have the pill organizer open like this.
Objection, Your Honor, misleading the jury under Rule 403. May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, Miss Mars has a bottle of pills and a pill organizer in front of her, both of which she's admitted are not the actual pills and pill organizer that are exhibits in this case. For her to demonstrate how she puts pills from this bottle that's not the one in the case into the pill organizer, which is also not the one in this case, misleads the jury into thinking that the two processes are identical when in fact they're not. We have no foundation on the dimensions, what pills are inside this organizer, what the organizer is. Therefore, since they're not the exact same, it misleads the jury and is therefore inadmissible under Rule 403.
May I respond?
Mr. Ndani, you may, but I also have a question that I think will hopefully tailor your response. What is the purpose of this demonstration?
Your Honor, the plaintiff has claimed throughout today's trials that there were two pills that had Ms. Mars's fingerprints on them, her arthritis medication. Now we're demonstrating for the court that if there were any, if I may proffer, if there are any leftover medication as Ms. Mars was putting the pills into the organizer, and that she took them from her hand and put them back into the pill bottle, that might leave her fingerprints on there. Now, we're not going to question her on whether her fingerprints would be left on there or not, simply demonstrating for the jury how she would do that, so then during closing arguments, we can make our arguments.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, this demonstration doesn't have any probative value. They can get the exact same testimony Mr. Mandani just stated verbally through Ms. Mars. In fact, Mr. Mandani did a pretty good job of telling us what the point of it is himself. But what it does do, while it doesn't have probative value, is mislead the jury because these aren't the pill bottles and pill organizer from this case.
Well, Mr. Gondam, I will hear from you in a moment, Mr. Mandani. But Mr. Gondam, my question is, how is this so likely to mislead the jury in terms of the pills and the thing as to be excluded in the first instance rather than, say, a limiting instruction?
Your Honor, depending on what the limiting instruction is, we'd be open to one. But the fact that they're not the exact same as the ones in the case makes it misleading. Additionally, the bigger issue is that it has no probative value, which is also one of the requirements that the defense has to meet under Rule 403.
All right, Mr. Mandani, I'll hear from you briefly.
Yes, Your Honor. In order for evidence to be excluded under 403, the misleading value has to substantially outweigh the probative value. Now, the probative value, Ms. Gondam is not correct that there is no probative value. The probative value is that the jury gets to see visually how Ms. Mars gets to place those pills in the pill sorters, which directly contradicts what the plaintiff has claimed throughout their entire case about the forensic evidence. Now, the pill organizer and the pills don't have to be exactly the same to see the process. That part is clear.
So I think we're gonna split the baby, to use the idiom. What we're gonna do is we're gonna give the jury a limiting instruction that this is not, well, and Mr. Mandani gave you a limiting instruction that there's not to be any testimony about fingerprints or the likelihood of fingerprints. Now, if you want to walk through the process, I think the probative value is minimum, but I don't think the prejudicial value is substantial. So I'm going to allow you to do it quickly and with limited commentary.
Certainly, Your Honor.
And the jury will be instructed that neither the pills nor the container are the exact ones in dispute in this case. Now, Mr. Gondam, you look like you'd like to say something, so I will hear.
Your Honor, in that case, I'd like to make a relevance objection. If, as Your Honor just said, the probative value is minimum, then there's no reason that they should be doing this. It doesn't make any fact more or less likely, and therefore it's inadmissible under 401.
Minimum is more than nothing. And as I think, I don't mean to take your argument away from Mr. Mandani, but I think my ruling is a reasonable one based on the circumstance in which we find ourselves. So I'm going to note that it's minimal, but minimal is enough, which I think you were about to tell me, Mr. Mandani. So I will, my ruling will stand as I just said it, and let's not dally on this.
Of course, Your Honor.
And now, Ms. Mars, could you please demonstrate how you would generally put pills into a pill organizer?
Of course. So I would pour out the pills into my hand like this, get a few, then I would put them into the organizer, as many as fit in a given day, as many as, of course, Miss Lee needed in a given day. And then if I had any left over, I would just take those pills and I would put them back in their bottle.
Thank you, Ms. Mars. And now I want to talk to you about Stevie Rogers. Did you know the plaintiff before 2018?
I did. Yeah, when I first started working for Agatha, Stevie, Stephanie, she would come over all the time. It did, yeah. A few months after I started working there, Stevie's mom, who is Agatha's daughter, was killed in a car crash. And I pretty much didn't see Stevie for 10 years after that.
Do you know if Ms. Lee and Stevie Rogers had any communication during those 10 years?
I saw Agatha write to Stevie, call Stevie, try to get in touch almost every week, but I never saw Stevie respond.
So let's talk about how Ms. Lee responded to that silence. Are you familiar with Exhibit 9?
I am, yes.
Mr. Peel, could you please put Exhibit 9 on the screen? It's already in evidence, Your Honor. Now, when was this will written, Ms. Mars?
That was in 2018.
Does this will say anything about Stevie Rogers?
Yes, it says that I would get Agatha's estate and that Stevie wouldn't get any of it.
When was the next time you saw Stevie Rogers after this will was made?
It was just a few months later. Stevie showed up one day in July of 2018 and she asked to move in with us.
How did Ms. Lee respond to all of this?
She let Stevie in. I don't know that it was easy for her, but she didn't turn Stevie away.
Ms. Mars, you said that Ms. Lee had disinherited Stevie Rogers. Did you ever hear the two of them discussing this?
I did, yes.
When was that?
It was the morning before Agatha died, about 11:30 in the morning.
How did you hear this conversation?
I went to bring Agatha some tea in her study and Stevie was in there, so I caught a bit of what they were saying.
What exactly did you hear?
I heard Stevie say, "I know you cut me out of your will. I've changed. I hope you'll reconsider."
Did you hear Ms. Lee respond?
Yes. Miss Lee said no. She said that she loved Stevie and that she needed Stevie to stand on her own 2 feet, that she wasn't going to give her any money.
Ma'am, what happened after this conversation?
Well, I had to take Agatha to lunch. She had an appointment at a restaurant, so I left the house.
When you took Ms. Lee to lunch, do you know who was in the house?
Just Stevie.
And how long were you out of the house?
About 2 hours.
While you were gone, ma'am, did you lock the door to your room?
No, I didn't have locks on that door.
What about the door to your closet?
No, I didn't lock that one either.
Did you lock any of the doors in the house?
I don't think so, no.
Ms. Mars, what did you do after you got back to the house?
I made dinner for Agatha and Stevie. I served it to them. I cleaned up the kitchen, and then I went to bed.
Well, let's talk about the next day, August 15th. What do you remember from that morning?
I woke up. I didn't see Agatha, which was weird because she usually got up before me. So I thought I'd make her some coffee. I thought she must have been tired to sleep in so late. And I went to bring Miss Lee her coffee.
Did you get Ms. Lee her coffee?
Yes, I brought it to her room. I knocked on the door. She didn't answer. So I went in. And she was still in bed. I thought she might be sleeping, but she was just so still. I knew something was wrong.
So what did you do, ma'am?
I ran to find Stevie. I was in shock, but I thought I had to tell Stevie, you know?
Did you find Stevie Rogers?
I did, and I said, come, please help. There's something wrong with your grandmother.
What happened when you got back to Ms. Lee's room?
We tried to wake her up, but there was no pulse. There were no vitals. She was cold. I tried everything, but she was gone.
Ma'am, what did you do when you realized Ms. Lee was dead?
I broke down. I'd been living with her for 10 years. I didn't know what to do with myself. She was my friend.
What did Stevie Rogers do when you two realized Ms. Lee was dead?
Stevie called the police and she said, my grandmother's been poisoned.
Ms. Mars, at that point, did you have any reason to believe that Ms. Lee had been poisoned?
No, she was in her 80s. She'd had some heart problems. I had no reason to believe that she had died by being poisoned.
Thank you, Ms. Mars. I'm sorry for your loss. Nothing further at this point, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mandani. Pass Mr. Gondam.
Yes, Your Honor. Proceed. Can Your Honor hear me?
Yes, now I can.
May I proceed?
Please.
Ms. Mars, I have a few more questions about you, but first I want to pick up where you left off and ask you some questions about Stevie Rogers.
Of course.
The night before Agatha died, you never saw Stevie in her room.
In Agatha's room?
In Agatha's room, yes, Ms. Mars.
No, I didn't see her there that evening.
You never saw Stevie holding a bottle of pills, did you?
No, I didn't.
The night before Agatha died, you never saw Stevie Rogers tampering with Agatha's pill organizer, did you?
No, I didn't see that.
And I want to move on to talk more about Agatha Lee's will. And on direct examination, you claimed that on August 14th, you heard a conversation about that will between Agatha Lee and Stevie Rogers, isn't that right?
I did, yes.
You heard Stevie Rogers testify in court today, right?
I did.
You heard Stevie say that Agatha was putting her in the will and removing you, right?
I heard her say that, but that's not how I remember the conversation at all.
Well, Ms. Mars, I'm just asking about what Ms. Rogers testified. She testified that Agatha was putting her in the will, yes or no?
Yes, that's what I heard her say.
After that conversation, you took Agatha to lunch, right?
Yes, she had a meeting with a writer named Ryan Cabrera.
And in the car ride after this conversation, You overheard Agatha on the phone, isn't that right?
That's right.
You heard Agatha make an appointment with her lawyer, right?
I can't say for certain. She was talking to somebody and she said, "Can I see you this week?"
But you thought it was Agatha's lawyer, right?
The person had the same name as her lawyer, yes.
The person who Agatha was talking to, who you thought was her lawyer, you heard her make that appointment from 3 days from August 14th, right?
She said sometime this week.
Now, Ms. Mars, I want to move on and talk about your financial situation in 2018. Now, your family, they've never been particularly wealthy, right?
No, sir, I wasn't raised with a lot of money.
A lot of the money that you made as Agatha's caretaker, you actually had to send it back to them, right?
Yes, I had no reason to use it with Agatha. She paid for my living and my meals, so I did send that money back to my mom and my sisters.
And some of that was to pay for rent, right?
Yes,
Another portion of that money was to be used for your sister's medical expenses, right? She was sick.
yes, she was.
But in February of 2018, you learned that you might not have to worry about money ever again. Isn't that right?
Yes, Agatha told me she was putting me in her will. It was a shock. I didn't know that.
And not only were you going to be in her will, you were going to receive everything that she owned, right?
Yes,
You knew that her cash, just her cash, well, that was at least $20 million, right?
at the time, I didn't know exactly how much it was. I knew she was wealthy.
But now you know it's 20 million or more, right?
Right, there's about $20 million, yes.
In your own words, this money would change your life.
Yes,
You'd be able to cover your sister's medical expenses with no problem at all, right?
I don't need the money for my sister's medical expenses, sir.
Oh, Miss Mars, I'm just asking you about your state of mind in 2018. If you had gotten that $20 million, you wouldn't need to worry about paying for those medical expenses, would you?
In February, I needed money for medical expenses, yes.
But Miss Mars, you'd only get the money from the will if Agatha passed away.
Right.
But if your sister passed away before Agatha did, you wouldn't be able to help her, would you?
Sir, my sister did pass away before Agatha did, and I was not able to help her.
Miss Mars, I'm sorry for your loss. I just need a yes or a no to my question. If your sister passed away before Agatha did, you wouldn't have been able to help her.
That's right. My sister passed away in April. There was nothing the doctors could do.
So let's talk about how Agatha died. You now know that Agatha died because she was poisoned with chloroandramine, right?
Yes.
You knew about this allergy since you started working for her, right?
Yes, of course. I was her nurse.
You knew that just one pill of chloroandramine had given her a heart attack.
That was my understanding when I was hired. Yes.
2 pills, that would almost certainly kill her, right?
I knew it was a very severe allergy. Yes.
You also know that Agatha's arthritis medication, well, it looks pretty similar to chloroandramine.
That's right. It's called Winterin. Both of the pills are purple.
They have the same shape,
Yes.
same color,
Yes, they do.
both odorless.
I believe so. Yes.
They don't taste like anything, do they?
I've never tasted Miss Lee's medication, but I believe so.
To your knowledge, they're virtually identical,
That's right.
except one would kill her and one wouldn't.
Yes, she was not allergic to Winterin. She was allergic to chloroandramine.
Now, Miss Mars, you're a trained nurse, right?
Yes, sir. I have my bachelor's, and I'm in the process of getting my MSN.
Even though you're a trained nurse, even you, it's hard for you to tell the difference between these 2 medications just by looking at them, right?
Of course.
So Agatha, she probably couldn't tell the difference between those, could she? Just by looking at them.
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Have you heard, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, it's just based on the witness's perception. She can say yes, no, or I don't know. Additionally, we've laid the foundation that she, as a trained nurse, can't tell the difference between the 2. Agatha, as not a trained nurse, is well within her scope of knowledge to know whether or not, to her, the best of her knowledge, whether Agatha could tell the difference between the 2.
May I respond?
Briefly.
Your Honor, Mr. Ghanem can ask Ms. Mars about whether she would confuse his medications, but to ask whether Ms. Lee would confuse his medication, that's asking Ms. Mars to speculate. For all we know, Your Honor, Ms. Lee could have very well been able to tell a difference because she was deathly allergic to the pill.
Well, let's not get too cute, Mr. Madani. I do agree it's calling for speculation. It's probably on the line, but don't oversell yourself, sir. So I will sustain your objection. I will strike that question.
So, Ms. Mars, it's a yes. These two pills, virtually identical. It's hard to tell the difference by looking at them, right?
Right, they're both small, purple, yes.
But Agatha, well, it really wasn't her job to tell the difference between the two pills, was it?
No, sir.
That's right. Agatha didn't take the pills out of the bottle herself, right?
No, I gave her pills once a week. I put them in an organizer for her.
That's right. Every Saturday, you'd fill up her organizer, right?
Yes.
And then every day she would take the pills that you put in there.
Yes.
Miss Mars, you know that chloroandramine is a prescription drug, right?
No, sir. Chloroandramine is an over-the-counter medication. Winterin is a prescription drug.
My apologies, Miss Mars. Let me amend that. You don't need a prescription to get chloroandramine.
No, a person would not need a prescription. It's a heartburn medication. It's fairly common.
So let's talk about how you could have gotten chloroandramine. You know it's available at pharmacies, right?
Yes.
But the day before Agatha died, you actually went to a pharmacy.
I did. With 3 women living in the house instead of 2, we were running out of things like shampoo and conditioner pretty quickly, so I went to fill up on those.
Now, you say you got toiletries at that pharmacy, right, Miss Mars?
Yes, I did.
But right now, you can't tell us what toiletries you bought.
Not to the brand, not exactly, no.
And you paid in cash for that purchase, right?
That's right. If I was buying things for the house, Miss Lee would generally give me cash to do that since it was going for everyone, not just myself.
So you don't have a receipt from that purchase saying that you didn't buy chloroandramine, yes or no?
I don't have a receipt, but I didn't buy chloroandramine.
So that's a no, you don't have a receipt from that purchase proving what you bought?
No, I paid in cash. I don't have a receipt.
Miss Mars, when the police searched your bedroom, they actually found a black bag containing chloroandramine in your closet, right?
I heard them say that, yes.
And when the police found that bag containing the substance that killed Agatha, well, you know you had your fingerprint on it.
Yes, I heard the detective say that there was one of my fingerprints on it.
Thank you, Miss Mars. And nothing further from me, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Ghanem. Mr. Madani, is there any redirect to this witness?
And no, Your Honor, we just asked that Ms. Mars be allowed to step down, be excused.
All right, Ms. Mars, you may step down with the court's thanks.
Thank you.
Would the defense like to call our next witness?
Defense calls Ryan Cabrera.
You may proceed, Mr. Peel.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ryan Cabrera.
Sir, where are you calling in from today?
Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've spent my entire life traveling the world, meeting interesting people, going exciting new places, and now I'm quarantining in my parents' basement.
Mr. Cabrera, what do you do for a living?
Well, I suppose that depends on who you ask. Some have called me the voice of my generation, others a modern day Plutarch, and others still the greatest American wordsmith since Dickens. I don't care for all that hyperbole, so I just say I'm a biographer.
Well, sir, how'd you get into that line of work?
I would always wanted to be a writer. And then in the 7th grade, I helped my best friend at the time with an assignment for our English class, the personal essay. I ended up writing almost the whole thing. She got an A and I got a B-. That's when I realized perhaps my future was in writing other people's stories.
Well, Mr. Cabrera, do you know how you're involved in today's case?
I do, yes. I was writing a biography of Agatha Lee, and I spent a great deal of time with her in the months leading up to her death.
Now, I'm showing you Exhibit 1. Could you tell us who this is?
Well, that's Agatha. That was her favorite cardigan. off beige with a wide pearl.
So I want to talk about Agatha Lee. When did you first meet her?
That was February 8th of 2018. I had reached out to her a few years prior about writing her biography, and well, she finally got back to me. It was the highest honor of my career. I mean, this is a woman who single-handedly redefined the entire mystery genre, only to retire after her first novel and become a greater enigma than she herself could ever write.
And sir, you said you spent a lot of time with her. Where do you usually meet?
Well, we usually met at her house, Lee Manor, but occasionally we would go out to restaurants, back when that was something that one could do.
Mr. Cabrera, what would you say your relationship with Miss Lee was like?
Well, I would like to think that we grew to be quite close. As a biographer, it's important to get to know every aspect of your subject. We mostly talked about her, of course, she being the biography, but she always made a point to ask about my life and my work.
Sir, I want to talk about someone named Drew Mars. Do you know who that is?
I do, yes. She was Agatha's caretaker.
How would you describe the relationship that you saw between Miss Lee and Miss Mars?
I mean, look, I have seen my fair share of good relationships. I literally wrote the book on Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson, but they seemed like they were close. I mean, when Drew was making dinner, Agatha would chop veggies. When Agatha wanted a cup of tea, Drew already had it steeping.
Sir, do you know someone named Stevie Rogers?
I do, yes. She was Ms. Lee's granddaughter.
How would you describe the relationship between Miss Lee and Miss Rogers?
Oh, Agatha and Stevie. Well, their relationship was, it was more complex.
Did you ever meet Stevie?
I did, yes. About a month before Agatha died, I came to the house one day and there was Stevie.
So I want to talk about one reason that might have happened. Now, this might seem a little out of the blue, but have you ever seen Miss Lee's will before?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, Agatha showed me two different versions of her will, one from 2008 and then another from 2018, as well as a letter that she sent to Stevie about those wills.
Mr. Mondani, could we get that letter up on the screen? Your Honor, this is the constructively redacted exhibit from earlier. Now, let's zoom in on the second to last paragraph here. Mr. Cabrera, could you read the first and last sentences of this paragraph for us?
Absolutely. Because we've become family in name only, I've decided to change my will. So, just as soon as I sign this letter, I'm going to sign a new will, leaving everything to Drew.
And how long after this letter was sent did you first see Stevie Rogers at Miss Lee's house?
Well, that was just a couple of months later.
Did you ever speak with Miss Lee about her relationship with Miss Rogers?
I did. Actually, it was the day before she died.
What did Miss Lee say there?
Well, she said that she couldn't stop thinking about something Stevie had asked her. She said, I hope I made the right decision. I love Stevie. I hope Stevie will forgive me.
Mr. Cabrera, did you ever see Agatha Lee again after that conversation?
No, I didn't. I did hear that they found her body the next morning.
How did you find out that Miss Lee had died?
Drew Mars called me. She was sobbing through the phone. I could barely understand what she was saying, but I got the point.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further.
Burdett.
Cross-examination, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Cabrera. I have a few more questions with you.
Absolutely. And may I just say, I love that shirt. It's very stripy.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Cabrera. First, I want to start where you left off on a conversation between you and Miss Lee on August 14th of 2018.
Absolutely.
There was another thing Miss Lee told you in that conversation. She said she was planning on meeting with her lawyers that Friday.
That's correct, she did.
But you know Miss Lee never got the chance to meet with those lawyers, right?
That's right. As I mentioned, she was found the next morning.
I want to back up to May of 2018, to an instance where you saw the defendant give Miss Lee some medication.
Yes.
You saw the defendant give Miss Lee a pill of medication, right?
That's right. And she started on this long diatribe about the pill's origin when it was patented. And eventually Agatha said, that's enough. I don't need the recitation.
Well, what Miss Lee told the defendant was, I'll take whatever you hand me, right?
That's right. I think at that point she'd had enough.
Now I want to move on to August 20th of 2018, to the reading of Miss Lee's will. You were present for that, right?
I was, yes, as her biographer in my official capacity.
And the defendant was also there, right?
Yes, she was.
During that will reading, Miss Lee's lawyer announced that her entire estate was going to go to the defendant.
That's correct, yes.
The defendant said, I can't believe it. I had no idea.
That's right, yes. That's something like that.
You found the defendant's performance to be pretty convincing, right?
That's true. I would say that.
But you were confused.
Yes.
Because you knew that the defendant already knew that she was in the will.
That's right. I wasn't sure if Agatha had changed her mind or told Drew that she wasn't going to put her in the will. I wasn't sure.
And to this day, you still don't know.
No, I haven't inquired.
But despite that confusion, you're still here testifying today.
Yeah, I agreed to come here and tell you all everything I know.
Well, the defendant actually personally called you and asked you if you would testify, right?
That's correct. I was planning on testifying anyway, but yes, she asked me to, and I said yes.
You have something to gain depending on the outcome of this case, right?
I'm not sure I know what you mean.
Well, let's go into that, actually.
Sure.
You would describe Miss Lee as one of North America's most premier mystery writers, right?
Well, I would describe her as one of the world's most premier mystery authors, but I suppose that's up to interpretation.
Well, you admire Miss Lee a lot, right?
Oh, yes.
In fact, you halted everything to move to Midlands for the chance to write her biography.
I mean, of course, this is the Agatha Lee we're talking about, ma'am.
Exactly, and you know that Miss Lee only ever wrote one book.
She only ever published one book, that's correct.
That's right, and that book she published in the 60s?
Yes, that's true.
And to your knowledge, it sold over 65 million copies worldwide.
I don't know the exact numbers, but it was a hit.
And the source of all the fortune we're talking about today came from that one book.
That's correct. As you mentioned, it was quite the success.
Like you made clear a few moments ago, she only published one book, but that wasn't the only book she wrote.
No, Ms. Lee told me that she actually wrote other books as well that she never published.
That's right. She wrote dozens of unpublished works.
Yeah, that's right.
You cannot fathom how much these unpublished works might be worth.
If one were to sell them, I don't know, but I don't know why anyone in their right mind would do that. I mean, this is the work of a genius. This is to be preserved, not sold.
So that's a yes. You can't fathom how much those works might be worth.
Right, like I said, that's not something you could put into dollars and cents. It's more than that.
Right, they're priceless, you would say.
Yes, indeed.
And you know that these works are part of Miss Lee's estate.
That was my understanding, yes.
And to your knowledge, whoever gets Miss Lee's estate gets those unpublished works.
That's right.
If the defendant wins today's case, She's promised to give all those priceless unpublished works to you.
That's correct. And if Stevie wins, I'll be asking her for the same.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Peel, is there any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Cabrera, you may step down with the court's thanks.
Well, thank you as well. Have a great rest of your day.
All right, does that conclude the defense's case in chief?
It does, Your Honor. We rest.
All right, it looks like we have plenty of time for the speeches, so I think whoever's in charge of that can let you know how much time you have remaining. I think that would be helpful for the folks that are about to give speeches, but we'll pause for a second to get that time.
Judge Hill, actually, we have to pause for a second. There's an issue that the teams are resolving with the tab room at this moment.
Okay. Mr. Bailiff, I also see Mr. William Warahay has entered the waiting room, and I keep getting a pop-up for it. And I know that's your prerogative, so I thought I'd just flag that.
Yeah, I think he's it's either...
It's disappeared.
It's just his computer, right? Will's not actually in the round.
No, it's one of the competitors, Harsha, just the wrong computer.
Right, correct. So Judge Hill, I'll let you know when they get that sorted out.
All right.
But until then, we're just gonna hang tight.
These things happen.
Yeah, David, I just checked with Tab and they're still working on it, so they haven't forgot about us, but still no go yet.
So will this is just for my own knowledge. Like, will all loss be modified for this? Because
Yeah.
we were doing great on time.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about time.
Okay, great.
So it looks like everybody's back. Is that right, Mr. Peel? I see you. Mr. Sridhar, you're back.
We're both back.
We're both back. Okay.
I'm also back. Yes, sir.
All right. Let me just make sure that we have the all clear to go ahead. Did they tell you guys? I haven't gotten a notification that we can start yet. Did they tell you if we're good to go?
They said they weren't going to do anything further with this trial. They didn't say specifically whether we were good to go, but
I think we're good to go.
yeah, I would imagine so.
All right. Let's go ahead, Mr. Hill, and I think we just have closings. So it's back to you.
All right. I'm not going to inquire what happened. We will proceed accordingly. So we will invite the plaintiff to give their closing argument. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. To stay in the will she had to kill. Members of the jury, February 1st of 2018 was the best day of the defendant's life. That was the day that she learned her elderly patient, Miss Lee, had decided to leave her as sole heir of that $25 million fortune. All the defendant had to do was sit and wait, and she'd be set for life. But today we heard that all that changed when Miss Lee's only living family member, her granddaughter, Stevie Rogers, showed up at her doorstep. As the defendant watched Miss Lee and her granddaughter reconnect, she became afraid that that $25 million fortune she was promised might suddenly go away. And then we heard about what happened on August 14th, that with her ear pressed against Miss Lee's study door, the defendant overheard a conversation in which Miss Lee promised to change her will and give her granddaughter make her the sole heir of that $25 million fortune, meaning the defendant would get nothing. Now, the defendant didn't know when this change would happen. All she knew was that it would be soon. With the window of opportunity to get that $25 million closing fast, the defendant knew she had to act quickly. To stay in the will she had to kill. So that night, the defendant entered Miss Lee's room armed with intimate knowledge of her medical history. Because you see, the defendant admitted that she knew Miss Lee was deathly allergic to chlorandramine, that it was identical to a medication that Miss Lee was already being given by the defendant. The defendant knew it would be simple to switch those 2 pills of arthritis medication for 2 pills of deadly chlorandramine. And then all she had to do was wait for Miss Lee to take those pills like she normally did and die in her sleep. No one would be the wiser that this was anything more than a natural death, and the defendant would walk away $25 million richer. To stay in the will she had to kill. But you see, unfortunately for the defendant, killing someone to profit off their death is illegal. As Mr. Gondam told you earlier, in Midlands there's something called the Slayer Statute. According to the statute, if you kill someone, you can't receive any part of their estate. And that's why the plaintiff decided to sue the defendant for wrongful death. And as such, we have a burden of proof. We had to prove to you that the defendant knowingly or purposely caused Miss Lee's death. And we had to prove this to you by a preponderance of the evidence, which just means more likely than not. And we did, by showing how the defendant killed Miss Lee. So let's talk about how. From Miss Lee's autopsy, we know that she died from ingesting 2 pills of deadly chlorandramine. And members of the jury, it's lucky we even know that much, because if the defendant had her way, we would never know. Because from the moment the defendant discovered Miss Lee's body dead, from the moment Miss Rogers called the police, The defendant insisted Miss Lee's body be cremated. If the defendant had her way, there would have been no autopsy, no toxicology report. There would have been no evidence that this was anything more than natural. If the defendant had her way, if cremation would have occurred, all that evidence would have gone up in smoke. And it makes sense that the defendant wouldn't have wanted the police to run these tests on Miss Lee. Because you see, the defendant admitted she was one of the only people that knew that Miss Lee was deathly allergic to chlorandramine. She admitted that she was giving Miss Lee a pill of arthritis medication that looked identical to chlorandramine, and she was the only person that knew that. She was the only person that would have known how easy it was to switch the pills. And we know that's exactly what she did, because remember what Mr. Bond found. 2 pills of arthritis medication that looked identical to chlorandramine with Drew Mars, the defendant's fingerprints, put back in the bottle. Those were the pills that were replaced with chlorandramine. And the defense tried to get up here. They tried to show you some pills being dumped in an organizer and tried to confuse you that this was just how the defendant did things. But I want you to remember, the defendant gave Miss Lee plenty of other medication, and the only pills that had her fingerprints were the 2 pills of arthritis medication that matched those 2 pills of chlorandramine. The defendant had the knowledge. She had access to Miss Lee's medication and her pill organizer. She had the opportunity. But it goes even further, because the police found a bag filled with chlorandramine in the defendant's closet. A black bag with the defendant's fingerprint on it, and only the defendant's fingerprint. She had the knowledge, she had the opportunity, and she also had the murder weapon. So let's talk about why. Why would the defendant kill Miss Lee? Well, we know that that morning, or the morning of August 14th, she overheard a conversation between Miss Lee and the plaintiff about Miss Lee's estate. Miss Rogers told you what was said in that conversation, that Miss Lee promised to change her will and make Miss Rogers, her granddaughter, the sole heir instead of the defendant. The defendant got up here and she tried to deny what was said in that conversation. But I want you to pay close attention to what happened immediately afterward. Immediately after that conversation, the defendant admitted that Miss Lee called her attorneys. Mr. Cabrera told us that she had an appointment scheduled for that Friday. That appointment was to change her will. And the defendant also admitted that the moment after this conversation, the moment after she dropped Miss Lee to lunch, she went to the pharmacy with a wad of cash. And for the jury, she went to that pharmacy to buy chlorandramine because at that point she knew to stay in the will she had to kill. Most normal people might not think that $25 million is a good enough reason to kill someone who trusts you. But we know the defendant felt differently. Because remember back to that will reading, that when Miss Lee's attorneys announced that the defendant was going to get that money, the defendant's reaction was to say, I don't know, I had no idea. The defendant lied to the police to avoid suspicion. And we know she lied because we have this email from February of 2018 where she admits she knew if Miss Lee died, she was going to get that money as long as she stayed in the will. And to stay in the will, she had to kill. Do not let the defendant profit off Miss Lee's death. Find for the plaintiff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burdett. Mr. Peel.
Members of the jury, everyone here agrees that Agatha Lee died on August 14th, 2 years ago. Everyone agrees that she died because of 2 pills of a drug called chlorandramine. And everyone agrees that someone switched those 2 pills of chlorandramine with Miss Lee's arthritis medication. but where we disagree. And what this trial really comes down to is who the person was that did that. Who switched the pills? And the evidence today has been pretty clear. Stevie Rogers was pulling the strings. Now, at the beginning of today's trial, Mr. Gondam, in his opening argument, told you about the law in Midlands. And he said that if a person kills someone else, then they can't inherit any of that person's money. In other words, if Drew Mars caused Agatha Lee's death, then Miss Mars can't inherit any of her money. That is how the law works. But the reason that law is so important in today's trial is because Stevie Rogers knew about it before the events of today's case. Miss Rogers knew that if Miss Lee died and Drew Mars was blamed for it, then she would inherit everything. And today you heard how Miss Rogers made sure that is exactly what happened. I want you to think about what Miss Rogers did when she first came into her grandmother's room on August 15th. She picks up the phone, calls 911 and says this was a murder. Now at that point, she has no way of knowing that's true. There's no autopsy, there's no physical evidence. Even the police thought Miss Lee had just died in her sleep. And yet for some reason, Miss Rogers already knew. And that wasn't all she knew. Because when the police got there, Miss Rogers asked for two specific things. She didn't say, officer, do everything you can, or officer, conduct every possible test. No, you saw the police report today. Miss Rogers asked specifically for a toxicology screen. She asked over and over again for a toxicology screen specifically. And she asked for a search of Drew Mars's bedroom. And I want you to think about just how lucky Stevie Rogers would have had to be in order to get this right. She asked for a toxicology screen. Not every possible test, no, specifically a toxicology screen. She asked them to search Drew Mars's bedroom, not the entire house, not even the scene of the crime, specifically Drew Mars's bedroom. And those two things, that toxicology screen and the search of Drew Mars's bedroom, just so happened to be what turned up the plaintiff's most incriminating pieces of evidence. Members of the jury, she obviously knew. She even said it herself on the stand today. She knew what that toxicology screen would show before she even got the results. So then we have to ask why Miss Rogers did that. How did she know that a toxicology screen would show that her grandmother had been poisoned? How did she know that the drugs being used to kill her grandmother would be found in Drew Mars's closet? Now, the plaintiff here has to say that that's all just a big coincidence. That Stevie Rogers is just somehow a fantastic guesser. They have to say that because that is the only other possible explanation. But members of the jury, there are only two options here. Either Stevie Rogers magically picked two things out of a hat and somehow guessed where all of the incriminating evidence would be, or she knew where it would be. That Stevie Rogers was pulling the strings. She knew where it would be because she killed Miss Lee and she planted the evidence. And so we have to ask why Miss Rogers did that. Well, the answer can be found in that letter that was sent to Miss Rogers in February of 2018. This letter says, because we've become family in name only, I've decided to change my will. It says, just as soon as I sign this letter, I'm going to sign a new will, leaving everything to Drew. And that was a problem for Miss Rogers. Someone with no income, no job, and who needed her grandmother to take care of her. Miss Rogers even admitted herself that she knew the only way she was going to see a cent of that money was if Drew Mars got disinherited. And so Miss Rogers took matters into her own hands because Stevie Rogers was pulling the strings. And that's a problem for the plaintiff, because today they had to prove their case to you by a preponderance of the evidence, which means they had to prove to you, more likely than not, that it was Drew Mars who caused Agatha Lee's death. And they haven't met that burden today. And to help you see why, let's go through some of the evidence they did bring you, starting with the motive. Now, Miss Burdett got up here and said that Drew Mars killed for the whip. But members of the jury, we don't actually know that. Stevie Rogers says that Miss Lee was going to put her back in the whip. But that's a contested fact in today's case, because Drew Mars disagrees, says it isn't true, says Miss Lee wasn't going to change that whip. And so the motive really comes down to who you believe. One of these two people has a motive to lie, and one of them is lying. How do we know who's who? Well, we brought you a second witness, Mr. Cabrera, to show you that what Miss Mars told you was true. Mr. Cabrera told you about a conversation he had with Miss Lee on the day she died, where she said, "I hope I made the right choice. I hope Stevie will forgive me." Members of the jury, if Stevie Rogers was telling the truth, if Agatha Lee were really going to write her back into the will, then what could there possibly be to forgive her for? We know that story isn't what happened because Stevie Rogers was pulling the strings. And then they've been talking about the physical evidence a lot today. They've been claiming it's their smoking gun in this case. But when you look a little closer at that evidence, it doesn't actually prove that much. First, they talked about the fingerprints on the bag and on the arthritis medication, but members of the jury, of course those prints were there. Miss Mars was Miss Lee's caretaker. She handled the arthritis medication every week, and that bag was just sitting in her closet. Maybe she brushed it at some point, but they can't tell you that isn't what happened. They can't tell you when, how, or whether Miss Mars has even opened that bag at all. And then here's where the plaintiff's case really falls apart, because they found that bag in Miss Mars's closet a week after Miss Lee was already dead. And after Miss Rogers had been making Miss Mars a suspect. Members of the jury, if Drew Mars had really done this and knew she was a suspect, as Miss Rogers made very clear, then why was that bag still there? She had plenty of time to get rid of it, throw it out, burn it, wipe the pills, wipe her prints, do anything. That bag being there with the pill still in it makes it less likely Drew Mars committed this crime, not more. That evidence was there because Stevie Rogers killed Miss Lee and framed Drew Mars for the crime she herself had committed. Stevie Rogers was pulling the strings. Find Miss Mars not liable. Thank you.
Ms. Burdett, I'm honestly not sure if rebuttal is permitted onto the structure of this trial. If it is, you're welcome to give one.
Yes, Your Honor, we do have a rebuttal in this trial.
My first round was an all loss round, so we didn't get to it.
Yes, Your Honor. Well, I have one for today.
Excellent. You may proceed.
The defense just got up here today and they made some pretty bold claims. But what have they actually given you to support that? They claim that Miss Rogers was pulling the strings and she killed Agatha Lee because what? She insisted there be the police investigation? That she had the audacity to ask the police to investigate further? Members of the jury, just think about it from Miss Rogers' perspective. Just the day before, she had a conversation with her perfectly healthy grandmother in which she was going to get the money. Drew Mars, the defendant, was going to lose it all. The defendant said, "No way, I'm letting that happen." And what, she walks in the next day and her healthy grandmother's dead? No bruises, no scrapes. It's not a leap to think it might be poison. When the plaintiff has, or excuse me, when the defense has to say that asking for evidence is worse than asking evidence be burned, you know they're grasping at straws. To stay in the will Miss Mars had to kill. Find the defendant liable. Thank you.
All right, I believe that concludes today's trial. Thank you, everybody. I'll turn it over to the bailiff for the administrative handling.
Yep, so we're going to stop the live stream now and put both teams in their breakout rooms while the judges score. So once all the scoring ballots are submitted, teams, I'll bring you back in for comments.